But we definitely want to welcome you back to Summit this year, for those of you that have already been here, and welcome to those newcomers. Hopefully you'll find it beneficial and continue to come year after year. So this year I've been tasked with presenting 5 features of Master Control that practically run themselves. If you've seen any of my presentations ever, I'm a huge advocate for automating your system. I feel like it plays into the whole maintenance part of your system. The more things you have automated, the less things you have to fix because somebody did something wrong. So that's kind of the whole focus of this, is automate as much as possible to cut back your workload. So I'm going to kind of be dealing with computer here as I advance slides, so please bear with me. But the first thing we're going to talk about is numbering, how to automate your numbering, and a lot of you have probably done this, but maybe you don't know the benefits to it yet. How to populate all of the fields within your master control system rather than letting your users have to type in or select. Automate your course creation is a big part of master control. You can fully automate your training system so that it manages itself for the most part. And then using the auto load feature, which not a lot of people use. It is restricted to people that can use my files, but it's worth talking about. So let's see if we can get this to work. Uh-oh. I don't need to change my color scheme. Keep the current color scheme. Let's see if it'll work now. So by the show of hands, I just want to know how many of you truly are sysadmins for your system. So quite a few. How many are sub-admin, doc admin level users? Okay. So this is applicable to, I would say, doc admins and up. Because you do participate a lot in the whole configuration of your system. So I always talk about, too, the role of the system administrator. It's a huge role. Those of you that do it can probably laugh in my face because I have no idea. But you are responsible for a great deal of things. Initially, as a new customers, you're responsible to gain the system requirements from those in your business organization and implement those into the system. You're also going to be responsible for configuring your system to meet those requirements so people aren't ticked off once they do get into master control. And you have to educate your end users on how to use the system. The more you automate, the less you have to educate. If you're requiring people to type in the number, you have to spend more time educating them on that rather than just assigning that to them. And then you have to implement everything that you've implement and validate all of the procedures that are going into your system, and then maintaining. Oh my goodness, it's going to keep doing it to me. Let's change the color scheme. See if that helps. And then you have to manage that system after go live. So this whole thing is centered around cutting down all of your management tasks, making it a little more simple for you in the long run. So one of the things I always talk about too is the help. I come from a support background, so I'm in education now, but I spent 2 years in support. And one of the things that we notice when people call in, a lot of the times their questions are found in the help file. And so that should be a first resource for you. If it's not a typical issue, that that probably is a true support issue. But if it's, how do I do this again? Rather than calling support, spend 5 minutes and look at this. And a lot of times your questions can be answered. I know it's not a perfect solution, but it's worth a quick search because, as you know, the help is searchable. It's there. It'll pull back by keyword. It'll pull back through the table of contents. A very good resource for everybody. So, like I said, the first thing we're really going to focus on is the automation of numbering. So Master Control will automate just about everything for you number-wise. Info cards, which includes all your documents, your forms, your courses, your trainees, your packets, data structures, analyzer agents, those are all can be configured for auto numbering. And as you do this, you no longer have to keep logs of numbering, right? It cuts down that maintenance task of keeping, what number gets assigned next. How should people set up this number in the system? It'll also, if you get rid of your smart numbering and remember to train your end users to search on all the other metadata. And I know that's especially for new customers hard to do because our users are so used to finding a document based on this style of number, it becomes a challenge for them in a new system to find a document. And so it really is super important that you do spend that time teaching them that Where it used to be built into the number, it's found in other metadata, the subtype, the vaults, the life cycle, whatever that is, it can be found elsewhere. And where that's not applicable, custom fields are always used. Okay. So for a lot of you, this is probably something that you've done 100,000 times, maybe you can teach me a few things. But for those of you that haven't done it that many times, you have to configure your number to be automated. One of the things that people often neglect to do is to lock down your number and make it only available to the info card types or subtypes that it should be used for. By leaving that open to all info card types, it could be selected in the wrong spot, which then creates a maintenance task for you to clean that up. Not always. I mean, that's less common because you do go into your info card type and subtype and assign it specifically. Sorry about the screen here. But the other thing is make sure that you are aware of what each section does. The easiest thing you can possibly do with a number is text increment. That makes it simple for your system. People aren't learning a bunch of different types of numbering. One number looks like this, the next number looks like this. Why so many different formats? If you can standardize that and make it very simple while teaching the people to search on the other metadata, it makes it a little bit easier for your users. But you do have to remember, this does not say only go to this type or subtype. This just says make it available to that. You have to remember to go back to that subtype or that type and make sure you assign that numbering series. But if you're doing that with all of your numbers in the system, this list should be pretty short. You should only be seeing one, maybe two, maybe there's a generic number that could be used. But it should be pretty easy to find and less of a temptation or an accidental selection of the wrong number when they're setting up these types and subtypes.
And just, I think this is right, but if you do assign the same number scheme to different, it's the system still enforces.
Oh, sure, yeah, and it will, if I have 5 subtypes, but I assign it to the main type, so all of those subtypes use that numbering series, it will just use it for all. You will have one subtype that gets number 1, another subtype might get number 2, and the next subtype gets number 3. So it's kind of a distributed rather than a succinct numbering scheme. So you kind of have to get used to that. If you're used to having to have all your numbers in a row, perfectly aligned, they will be distributed amongst the different subtypes. So it is important to simplify your numbering. And here's one example that I don't know if this were to just come up for me and I wasn't fully prepared for it, I don't know if I would know how to answer this as an end user. But I create a new info card, I choose the type or the subtype, and then this box just pops up. I should have gotten a new info card with a number, but now I'm expected to fill in this, and this is a little bit exaggerated. I know most of them right on my bed. But I have to fill this in, and I don't know what that means. So I'm going to try and push one button, and I get a red wink saying, oh, you can only put in a number. So I put in a number, I go to the next one, I put in a dash, because it has a dash on the sheet that I copy from, and it won't take my dash, right? And so it takes a minute to get used to this style numbering, and I do know we build these into the system for a reason. There are business purposes where you may say, it's our only option. We have to use it, but I do say, where possible, simplify this number. Make it self-assigning, make it so that people don't have to think, and you'll have less mistakes in your system. Because all I'm doing here is saying, get it right if you can, but if you can't, just go ahead and guess, put in some numbers, right? So it's there for a reason, but I would cut back where possible. So you go through this entire configuration process. You go through several steps of configuration. Anyone that knows the system well knows that you have to go configure the number. You have to go and you have to configure the info card types and subtypes. And then you have to go and configure the vaults and the life cycles. You have to go and you have to configure all of your custom fields, right? You've done all of these different things. And really all they do, they're just kind of floating out there for use wherever until you lock them down. So once you go a step further, and instead of just leaving them hanging out there, you actually take those pieces, the custom fields, the life cycle, the numbering, and you assign those back to that type and subtype. They're for use anywhere. People could select the wrong one. But now when you lock those down, and I say I need a new info card of this type and this subtype, my info card gets assigned all of that information. I don't have to think, right? That includes the packet too. If I've created a packet type in the system and I assign it to my info card type and subtype, when I say sign off new packet task, this needs to go on a route, it doesn't ask me what packet I want to use. It simply says use this packet, and then if in that packet there are a couple of routes that could be used, I could select from the route list. But typically, if you can assign one route to one packet, to one info card type and subtype, that requires no thought on my part. It just knows where to go. Okay? So you guys taking the time to configure the system fully, or as much as your system will allow, meaning your business, right? You'll really cut down on your maintenance tasks of having to go in and clean these things up. Okay? So a fully automated info card, I say new document, instead of filling out that horrendous number I just showed you, I get to a number assigned. And you'll notice that some of these aren't grayed out, and that's because I did this with elevated rights. But for an end user, they would get a number, it would be grayed out, they couldn't change it. They would get a revision, grayed out, they couldn't change it. They would get assigned the lifecycle and vault. They would get assigned the next review date once it hits the release state. The custom fields that are supposed to go with info card type or the subtype would automatically be there. And you'll notice they are required, so I would have to fill those out. That's another area, though, that can be managed a little better. I won't say automated, because I do have to manually click on one, but if you can make those selectable rather than type in answers, text fields, it makes it a little bit better for reporting and for building your organizers. And then when I say sign off new packet task, I get assigned a packet that knows which route or routes it should use. So I've fully automated this for my end user, at least to the point, the only thing they can really screw up is the title and maybe upload the wrong document. I don't know that we can make the system enforce the right document. But I've really cut down the thought that a user has to put in this. I've also cut down on my end user training that has to go into this. And again, the mistakes that could be made. So there are the steps that you have to take to configure the entire system. And we do recommend going, if you're starting from square one, in a specific order to do this. By starting with your info card types and your subtypes, all you're doing is creating those. They're a blank slate at first, but you have an end goal in mind. So as you go through these steps, business organization, that's kind of a one-time thing, so it'll be applicable across your entire system. But as you go through these steps, you're thinking about that type, subtype creation that you just made. And so now, as I go through and I create the lifecycle and vault, it is matching to what your subtype is that you're going to be using. Your numbering, your custom fields, and then going back and assigning the things that you do at certain points back to that type and subtype will ensure that those do get assigned rather than forgotten about. Okay. So now let's go talk about auto-creating the course. Does anyone use this? The auto-create course?
I'm trying to.
Okay. Okay. So I don't know that we can talk about those issues in here, but support can definitely help you. And so hopefully as I go through some of these, maybe it'll spark something as well. So anyone else use it more successfully than this? How do you like it? When do you use it? Like what types and subtypes do you use it for?
Just new SOPs.
So are you training on all your SOPs? Okay, that's the typical scenario. Either all or most of the time. You can use auto-create course to just automatically create the course for you as soon as a new document goes in the system, or at least have the option through a radio button. Okay, so where's this done? Well, it's done on the type or subtype, and it's at the very bottom. There's a little auto-create course checkbox. And if you check that, then you'll be given the rest of these options. So you have the option to create the course immediately. What does that mean? It means it's going to create the course as soon as the new document gets made, a new course is going to get made every single time, without exception. If I leave that unchecked, then I will have the option of creating the course, and I'll be given this, sorry, it's cut off, the radio button where I can choose yes or no, create the course this time, or not. And then if you'd like, you can make the info card's title the course's title as well, which typically matches. I know there's some variation to that. But if you don't check this box, then it's not going to be fully automated. And by that I mean, if you do select everything, you create the course, as soon as it's created, it's released. So you don't even have to go in and approve the course. It's already there, ready to go. So when your document gets released, your training is triggered. So it's kind of a nice setup. So your course template is something you do have to create, and you usually want to create this with the idea that you're going to be using it as a template. So you don't want to release this. What happens if I go ahead and I create a course template and I put job codes in there and I link it to, well, I wouldn't link it to a document, but I get everything set up with the verification and the triggers that are in place, and I release it. Training's going out, right? On a blank course or a semi-blank course. So you don't want to release it. You just want to leave it in draft to be used as a template course. Okay? And then the numbering series, of course, that you'll use for your course and the initial revision of your course. Yes?
So is there any way to choose and select when the timing of when the course will be released, or is it?
Yeah, so I'm going to go to that. So some of the triggers. So if you want it to be automated fully, I'll show you the triggers for doing that. If you need to go back in and make some changes before that course gets released, then you can also.
Like for us, we train on documents after they're approved, but before they're released.
Okay.
Once training is complete, that's when the document is
Sure.
perfected. So we can't have them going once the document is perfected.
But even still, even if you are going to train on a draft document, an approved but a draft document, you still have to have the course in release. So
Okay.
fully automating the course is great, and then you'll set up the document to handle
I just
that
want to know if we
aspect.
have that functionality, if it was just if it goes out on this step and that's it.
No. You can make it so it'll go out on the approved, once it's approved.
So will it automatically, when you say use the input title for the course's name, will it just automatically truncate it to 50 characters like it tries now?
I think they match, right? I'm not sure. But I thought the course title and the document title should be, accept the same amount of characters. I'm pretty sure on that. If not, yes, it would cut it off.
Okay.
But I think they're both 30 or 50 characters. Yeah. I could be wrong on that. Okay. Good question, though. So yeah, this could be fully automated, and you only really want to use this if you are, for the most part, creating a course every time a document of this type or subtype gets created. If not, then you're going to be stuck with either a lot of courses, or you're going to have to use that radio button a lot of the time to say, don't create a course this time. But if you're 75% or more, I would use this, and I would definitely set it up to not immediately create the course, but give me the option if that's the case. So the course template, so this is a snippet taken out of a course info card. So towards the bottom, you have all of your settings that would either launch training or not launch training. So if you wanted to come back here and approve your course and make sure everything's good, especially at first, so you trust it, right? And everyone hates training just automatically launching and having it be wrong. But you could set your course template, to be after manually reapproving the course, and that way you would have to come in here and approve it before the training would ever launch. But if you are good with it to go, you set it to immediately launch the course once the document gets approved. You don't have to come back in here and set that or quick approve the course. And then one of the bad buttons to select on your template would be to disable all training, because no training is going out if that's selected. So if you either select it to launch training when the course is released, or to enable all training for scheduled retraining or new trainees, then it will be kind of a self-managing thing. You do have to watch that top option on your document, though, so you don't retrain on versioning. So the course info card settings, we kind of just looked at these. If you set that to enable all training for scheduled retraining and new trainees, automatically launch. And then you've got your document info card settings also that have the very similar settings to enable all training, enable training for only scheduled retraining and new trainees, or disable all training. These kind of have to match. If you have your document set to disable all training, no training is going out, obviously. But my suggestion, and this will usually help to prevent false launching, to set this to only retraining and new trainees on both, and then training will be fully automated. I know that sometimes you guys have to go back in and update your exams. You have to go back in and make some changes, but if you have a read and understand that really you don't have to modify ever, you can set this up to just fully automate every single revision of the document. And as long as you're not enabling all training, if you go in and you have to do a quick approval on the course or the document for some reason, the system will check and make sure it's not sending training out to all of the people who have already taken it. Only if there's a new revision, a major change. Do you have a question?
Yeah, if I understand what you just said, you recommend to set it to enable for new training or
Retraining or new trainings.
right. And then if you want to retrain on the revision, you just approve the course.
Well, if you needed to retrain on the current revision, you can either set up annual retraining, or you can go in and you can change that at some point to enable all training and do a quick approval, and it would send training out to everybody. You also have additional options now for mass retraining if you wanted to go to the training folder. So,
Is that deferred until completed training percent?
Yeah.
Is that's the document info card?
yeah, so this is on the document info card. So if you have the option now, in version 10 you didn't have this option, but you can choose from 75% all the way up to 100 by increments of 5%.
So that made the document effective after the trainings.
Yeah, so once, in this case, if I change that to yes, training would have to be completed 100% before the document would go to release. That's a dangerous setting, because that could go on forever. And that's why we added the additional. So maybe 90% would be a little better option, just in case you got a new employee right at the last minute.
Or if you got rid of an employee and didn't recall his info card.
Yeah, it would sit out there forever.
Always waiting for that person.
So maintenance task, right? So there's my best recommendations. Enable training for scheduled retraining and new trainees, and then launch immediately for the course. And that way it'll kind of be controlled to automate the system, but not overly retrain, if you will. So if the document is revised, what happens if enable all training is selected? Yeah, everyone gets training. That's what should happen anyways, no matter if it's somebody that's trained on the previous revision or not, they should get training. But if the document, if you have to go in and you make let's go to disable all training, no training is going out, right? And then enable training for scheduled retraining, I'm an advocate for that. It won't go out if you just have to do a versioning of the document. So you go in and do a spelling modification, you quick approve it, it's not sending training to everybody. And then defer release, again, can go 75 to 100%. If the document's not revised, but just quick approved, like I just talked about, and you have it set to enable all training, that's where we get calls and support all the time. I just launched training out to the entire company again on accident. Okay, so that's one that's a little bit more, you have to be careful on.
Excuse me.
Yes.
Recall that training?
Yeah, you'd have to just either pull the course back to draft or the document back to draft and then kind of deal with those settings. And then enable training for scheduled retraining, that's the one that it would not push training out. It would check and say, did these people complete training on this revision? If so, don't launch training to them again. Okay, so auto load's another feature. Again, it has to be used, yes?
I have a question on this.
Sure.
So if I selected only send out training, so for if I have like a spell change
Huh?
in the document, on the next revision, is it going to automatically put it back to enable, or do I have to go back and change?
No, it'll just, you leave it set there if it's set to only new trainees. Because anytime you get a new revision of a document, that is a trigger for training. But if you version the document, then you don't have to worry too much about launching those out on accident.
Right, but if I revise it, is
Yes.
it going to change it back to enable?
No, it doesn't change it at all. It'll leave it set to enable training for new trainees or retraining. Retraining being that it's a new revision of the document.
So if you can get that, that's what that means?
Yeah, so revision is what's going to spark training in that case. Versioning would not.
Enable training for.
Let me go back to the document.
When you say retraining, that isn't the retraining flag on the course.
No. So that has its own flag as well. So if it's retrain every year, it's going to launch it out. Sorry if that was confusing. But so it would launch out. If nothing changed on the info card revision-wise, it's going to send out training annually or whatever you have it set to. If you set it to enable all training, but then you version the document, that's when mass training goes out when you didn't want it to. So you do have to be careful with the settings on the document info card as well as the course info card. Otherwise, you may have some issues with that. So, any other questions on training before we go to auto load? Does anyone use auto load? You guys do? How many documents are you bringing in weekly?
We just went massive use of it. We brought in 15,000.
Okay.
That's our previous.
So did you use auto load or did you use importing?
What's the auto load?
Okay, just curious. Okay, so auto load, I can tell you, it's not used by that many customers, but it is here for you if you ever decide you wanted to use it. So what auto load does is you have, well, let's go through the must first. So to use auto load, you have to be able to use my files. You have to have unique subtypes. So if I'm using a department, every one of my subtypes on a per department basis would have to be differentiated somehow because it creates the folder as a subtype. And then you must configure automatic info card loading for your system. Okay, so once it's enabled in the info card type or subtype, you can actually set it to launch a task out. So if you bring in a document, creates an info card, it can automatically launch out to somebody. But what it does, and this is kind of small, I'm sorry, I'll kind of explain, but if you have the My Files enabled on your system, it creates a My Files directory on the server, right? And then every user within your system can have their own folder within that My Files directory. Most of the time, people only go to their own folder. That's all they really see. But if you go up a level and you have auto load enabled, then it will create a folder at that upper level called auto, and then within that folder, you will have your individual subtypes listed, and that's why your subtypes have to be named uniquely. So once that's done, I go in and I drop a file into that subtype folder, and based on the settings of my subtype, the system, every 15 minutes, will check that folder, grab the copy of the document, bring it into the system, create an info card, and if I select it to do so, it'll launch it on a task. I only know of a few customers that use this on a regular basis, and they bring in thousands of documents a month. And so they just put them in the folder, let the system create it for them, launch it on a task, it's done. Okay, so I kind of explained this already. And yeah, like I said, schedule tasks is the trigger that checks that folder to know when to bring it in the system and create an info card for it. And like I said, if I have somebody selected as the task originator, I can take my automatically loaded document, launch it onto a task. You want to make sure you use a standard packet, make sure your default route is selected for that, and then the name of the person as the originator. So if you have originator in the route, it will know who to go to. Okay. So we've talked about a lot of, 5 of the parts that you can automate in the system, but there's a lot of other areas that you can utilize to be automated. Dynamic organizers are one of my favorite elements of the system. How many of you guys use organizers? How many of you guys have went through the trouble of making these dynamic or know what I'm talking about? Okay. You can go in and create an organizer, and you can drag documents manually into that organizer when you build it so that only those documents show up. But that's not very dynamic. Okay. If you create these based on saved searches or use taxonomies, these can automatically update for you. You don't have to worry about going back in and managing the documents that are in there. They're always up to date based on your saved search. And I know that's not always possible to come up with the perfect saved search that gets all the needed documents, but you can also use custom fields for that. So if a certain custom field has a value, it gets selected, it gets put into the organizer that's appropriate. That could be department, location, whatever that is. Using roles wherever possible. So making sure that is a very dynamic element. So if I'm in a responsibility role and my role is in somewhere in several routes, I leave the company, you take me out of that role, put somebody else in, you didn't have to go manually update everywhere in the system. It just automatically knows that is the new person that should be put into that responsibility. Schedule your reports, make them automated, make them come out every Monday, make them come out every Thursday at midnight, because that's your off hours, and we all know that reports are system intensive.
Every 5 minutes on April Fool's Day.
There you go. That'd be great. Save your valuable searches, make them virtual folders for yourself. Make sure you're not making too many of those public or you'll annoy your company. Automatically launch your reviews. Don't try and manually do that. Set those up right away. Set a retention policy if that's something that you're always dealing with. And then there's still other things in the system that you can find to make more automated, to cut down your workload. That's the goal. So instead of making yourself a slave to your system, make the system do the work for you. Just take the time, make sure that you're the one in control, cut yourself some slack, and please complete a survey. It's paper surveys here, or you go to the app.
Quick question on
Yeah.
auto load.
Yeah.
We load via import sheets.
Mhm.
Does the auto load allow you to incorporate, because we have that, we put previous number, current number, author, owner.
So you can. It's just based on your current configuration. It would come in as if you created a brand new document. It doesn't have all of those fields because you can't say it set a previous number on your InfoCard type or subtype and have it use that every time. So if you wanted that detail, you would want to do the import sheet. Yeah. Yep. Any other questions?